Hey guys! Tonight we're diving deep into velvet cushions, silver trays, and the intoxicating aroma of roasted beans wafting through silk-draped halls. You're about to drift through the shadowed chambers of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, where diplomacy was brewed slowly, one demitasse at a time. The city hums gently outside seagulls, calling over the Bosphorus, but in here time thickens like molasses. You stand at the edge of a culture that took its coffee very seriously. This is a world where coffee wasn't just a drink, it was a message, a coded language, a signal flare across the lavish chessboard of empire. One sugar cube too many, and you might accidentally declare war. Or worse, get reassigned to Cyprus. You'll meet scheming concubines, jittery diplomats, coffeehouse philosophers, and a few sultans who banned the brew entirely because they feared its power to stir the masses more than any sword ever could. Spoiler, didn't work. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in Istanbul at the hour when gold spills over rooftops and call to prayer echoes like a lullaby in reverse. The air smells like lemon blossom and charcoal. Somewhere nearby, bread is baking, and pigeons hop along mosaic domes like tiny courtiers. You stand at the edge of the old city, gazing toward the Topkapi Palace, heart of the Ottoman world. The gates open not loudly, but with the creak of age and ceremony. You're waved in with a nod by a guard whose mustache is almost as intimidating as his halberd. Your sandals click gently on smooth stone. There is no rush here. The pace of empire is brewed. Inside, attendants glide across the polished floors, trays balanced with impossible elegance. They carry small jewel-toned cups, finjans, no handles, because power should be sipped, not gripped. The smell of cardamom and roasted beans wraps around you like a shawl. You're led into a small, high-ceiling room with windows that trap morning sun and turn it into syrup. Cushions, carpets, curtains, and in the center, a brass coffee pot already steaming. No words, just a smile. You sit. A servant in embroidered robes pours your first cup. No sugar, no milk, just truth the Ottoman way. The first sip is like licking the edge of a secret. It's bitter, thick, gritty at the bottom, but also oddly comforting, like reading a warning in someone's handwriting and realizing they cared enough to write it at all. Across from you, a dignitary leans in. He says nothing, but the second sip is poured, and you realize this is the conversation. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans invented coffee diplomacy or merely perfected what the Ethiopians and Arabs began. But what's not debated is that here inside these walls, coffee was the lubricant of empire. Marriage proposals, land grants, ceasefires, and seductions all started with a cup like this. Here's your first mainstream fact to stir into that cup. The Ottomans were drinking coffee as early as the 1550s, thanks to traders from Yemen who brought the magic beans northward. Within a generation, coffee was so beloved it had its own palace official, the Kahvecibaşı, or chief coffee maker. His job, keep the Sultan's coffee hot and his enemies cold. Less well known is this fringe tidbit. Coffee cups were sometimes laced with powdered pearls, not for taste, but as a kind of passive-aggressive sparkle. If you were served one, you were being flattered, or warned, possibly both. Outside, the city awakens. Vendors shout, dervishes spin, cats pretend not to care. But inside this room, a centuries-old ritual continues. Your cup is refilled. This time it's cooler, smoother, less urgent. Welcome to the art of Ottoman coffee diplomacy. You've just been admitted to the most fragrant, slow-burning conversation in history. The second cup is never about coffee. You cradle it now, still hot, still rich, but smoother than the first. The bitterness is gone, or maybe you're just used to it. Across from you, the dignitary smiles. He hasn't said a word yet, and he won't, not until the third cup. This is the game. The rhythm of Ottoman hospitality is not unlike a waltz, slow, deliberate, and slightly theatrical. You're here to sip, not speak. Not yet. You glance around to the chamber again. Everything here whispers intention. The tray is silver, but not polished, worn just enough to suggest age, not neglect. The porcelain cups are hand-painted, each different. The rug beneath you carries the faded geometry of Tabriz red gold, in a blue so deep it looks like memory. Coffee is still new in this world, relatively speaking. Before the mid-1500s, no one in the Ottoman capital even knew what a coffee bean was. And now it's the oil in every bureaucratic hinge. But it didn't arrive with a shout, it slipped in with a sigh. You close your eyes and the city dissolves backward. The sounds muffle. The light bends. When you open them again, it's 1555, and you're standing in the Tahtakale district of Istanbul. The streets are tighter, the air thicker, and nestled between the leather merchants and spice sellers, two Syrian men are unpacking history. Their names are Hakim and Shams, traders by day, charmers by dusk, and they've just opened Kahvecibaşı, the first coffee house in the city. No one knows what to make of it. The neighbors are suspicious. The imams are wary. But curious noses follow the scent of something roasting. That something is coffee. At first it's a novelty, a bitter alternative to the syrupy sherbets and sweetened teas of the time. But quickly it becomes more than that. Students gather here, poets, philosophers, people who talk. And that dear sleeper is when the problem begins. Because talking leads to thinking, and thinking dangerous stuff. Historians still argue whether the rise of the Ottoman coffeehouse was a cause or symptom of shifting public consciousness. What's clear is that within a decade, coffeehouses exploded across the empire, each one a little nerve center of gossip, dissent, flirtation, and chess. Here's a mainstream nugget to swirl in your brew. Within 50 years of its introduction, there were over 600 coffeehouses in Istanbul alone. Some were grand, rivaling palaces in their furnishings. Others were simple, just stools and steam. But all of them served the same thing: permission to linger. Now for your quirky fringe delight, some patrons believe coffee had mystical properties, not just alertness, but clairvoyance. Enter tasseography, the art of reading coffee grounds. You finish your cup, flip it upside down on the saucer, and wait. The dried sediment tells your future, maybe marriage, maybe treason. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about this newfound caffeinated culture. You jump forward a few years and you're watching Sultan Murad IV stroll through the city in disguise, because that's what paranoid sultans did. He pauses outside a coffee house. He listens. He hears laughter, debate, lively voices. Too lively. He returns to the palace and issues a decree: coffee is banned. Not taxed, not regulated, banned under penalty of death. Yes, really. You probably won't survive this if you're caught brewing a secret pot under your floorboards. And yet everyone does it anyway. Coffee becomes contraband, brewed behind curtains and shared with a wink. You sip quietly. You pretend it's medicine. You pass it to a friend and it tastes like defiance. Your scene fades. You're back in the palace. The second cup is nearly gone. The dignitary leans back, still no words. But his eyebrows arch slightly as if to say, now we're getting somewhere. Outside, the sun has lifted fully. Minarets glow. The call to prayer echoes off tile roofs. But in here, the coffee is the only ritual that matters. You place your cup back on the tray, careful not to clink. The third cup is coming. The third cup arrives like a whisper you've been waiting for all morning. It's poured slower. The steam curls higher. And when the tray is extended toward you this time, there's a pause, an invitation for eye contact. This is the moment where diplomacy begins. The previous two were for trust. Now comes the reveal. You take the cup. You don't drink immediately. That would be uncivilized. Instead, you inhale. This one smells faintly of clove, maybe cinnamon. Or is that the velvet lining of the room itself? Ottoman interiors have a way of steeping into your senses. You sip. The flavor is deeper, almost smoky, and as it coats your tongue, your thoughts pull backward again. You want to understand how a bitter bean plucked from distant mountains became the elixir of kings. So you drift. And now it's not Istanbul, but far to the south, the Arabian Peninsula, specifically the port city of Mocha in Yemen. It's the 15th century, and the hills are wrapped in fog. The plants here look unassuming scrubby bushes on rocky soil, but their cherries hide a secret. This is where coffee begins. Not brewed in palaces, but boiled over coals in desert tents and mountain monasteries. The Sufi mystics are among the first to drink it with purpose. They call it kahwa, and they use it to stay awake during all-night chanting sessions. Rhythm and revelation, powered by beans. Here's your mainstream historical nugget. By the early 1500s, Yemeni ports were exporting thousands of pounds of roasted beans each year, mostly through the Red Sea trade. The Ottoman Empire, rising to regional dominance, quickly recognized the bean's value, not just economically, but socially. So what did they do? What empires always do? They took it. By the mid-1500s, the Ottomans had conquered Yemen and monopolized the coffee trade. Every bag of beans headed north had to pass through their fingers. That control was no accident. It was strategy carefully roasted. Here's the quirky twist. You didn't expect mocha beans were once considered so valuable that smugglers would boil the seeds to prevent them from sprouting abroad. A kind of botanical sabotage. Drink it all you want, they said, but you'll never grow your own. Historians still debate whether this boiling practice was widespread or just romanticized in European travelogues. But either way, it makes for a great bedtime image: bearded port inspectors dunking beans like angry baristas at customs. Back in Istanbul, the taste of those very beans now dances across your tongue. The man across from you finally speaks. He says something simple: "Kahvecibaşı. The coffee is good." You nod. Diplomatic language achieved. This is how things begin in the Ottoman world, not with speeches, but with sips. A treaty might unfold over 5 cups in 3 hours with silence doing most of the work. And the thing is, it works. No one storms out. No one raises their voice. The coffee calms, anchors, offers cover for careful phrasing. You look again at the servant who poured your drink. His posture perfect, his movements silent. You wonder what it takes to earn that kind of serenity. Turns out quite a lot. There was an actual position in the royal court called Kahvecibaşı, the chief coffee maker. His job was to prepare the sultan's coffee exactly right. But more than that, he was also responsible for knowing who should be served what and when and how. If the sultan needed to send a message without speaking, the Kahvecibaşı could do it with a bean blend and a nod. And here's your delightful detail. Many of these men were eunuchs trusted implicitly and trained not only in brewing, but in courtly espionage. Some even went on to become viziers. Imagine rising through the ranks because you knew the perfect clove to cardamom ratio. Now modern scholars bicker gently over how much political power these coffee officials really wielded. Some say they were glorified butlers. Others believe they were critical intermediaries, baristas, who brokered empires. As always, the truth is somewhere in the middle, hidden under a saucer. You finish your 3rd cup. Across the tray, a small cube of lokum, Turkish delight awaits. You take it grateful for the sugar. Beneath the sweetness, you taste rosewater pistachio and something else. Ambiguity, maybe. The dignitary stands. The conversation is over. Not because it's finished, but because the coffee is. As he leaves, you notice something curious. His empty cup is tilted slightly on its saucer off-center. You'll find out what that means later. For now, you just breathe and enjoy the quiet hum of caffeine diplomacy at work. The room doesn't go quiet, it settles. Like a curtain that lowers just halfway, the energy shifts. You're alone now, but not abandoned. The servant retrieves your cup, bowing with just enough deference to suggest that you matter, but not quite enough to let you believe you're important. This too is Ottoman precision. Outside, the breeze stirs through palm fronds and the occasional echo of laughter drifts from the kitchens. But inside, you're back in that rich silence. Not empty, steeped. A silence brewed low and slow. You rise from the cushion, your legs remember how to walk again. But your senses are still seated back with the coffee and its rituals. You step out into a courtyard paved with stones polished by centuries of sandals and intrigue. Now let's rewind again. The coffee you just drank wasn't always sipped in marble chambers or gilded rooms. At the beginning, coffee in the empire was democratic, chaotic, and deeply social. You walk now through the bustling heart of old Istanbul. The year is somewhere around 1570. The streets breathe, merchants shout, smoke curls from corner braziers, and tucked between a bookshop and a bakery is a shadowed doorway. No sign, just the aroma of roasted mystery. You enter. Welcome to the Ottoman coffee house. It's dim but warm. Carpets line the benches. The walls are crowded with low-hung lanterns and even lower-slung gossip. At one table, a man recites poetry between sips. At another, 2 old men argue whether astrology is heresy. Over in the corner, a woman sketches shapes in her grounds, reading her fate like it's overdue. Here's a mainstream fact to steep in your brain. By the late 16th century, the coffee house was the central social institution for Ottoman men. There were no pubs, no country clubs. This was at equal parts community center salon and verbal wrestling pit. And here's the charming fringe flourish. Many coffee houses employed a storyteller in residence called a meta. Picture it: an older man with expressive eyebrows standing by the hearth, reenacting epic battles or tragic romances with only a handkerchief and a change in voice. He's half historian, half stand-up comic, all caffeinated charisma. Of course, the authorities were less amused. Sultans came and went, and with them, coffeehouse crackdowns. They said it was because of vice, gambling, smoking, card games. But everyone knew the truth. Coffeehouses weren't just places to hang out. They were places to think out loud. And that's dangerous. Historians still argue whether these crackdowns were about morality or control. After all, a mosque sermon is one thing, but a smoky room where men debate tax policy over a cup of kave, that's an insurgency with cushions. And yet, no matter how many edicts were issued, the coffeehouses persisted, like moss through cracks. The minute one was closed, another opened. People needed their brew, but more than that, they needed the ritual, the theater, the unspoken agreement that here we're allowed to wonder out loud. You're seated again, this time on a creaky bench near the door. A man with a cat on his lap offers you a cup unsolicited. You accept it with a nod, and he smiles without a word. That's the rule here, the first cup is always shared. Ownership doesn't exist until the second. This blend is stronger, more spice, less heat. You swirl it and catch a scent of clove, but also something floral jasmine. Or was that his beard oil? You exhale slowly. The steam from your cup fogs the air in front of you like you're breathing out secrets. Your eyes wander the walls. There are paintings, some torn, some framed. A few Ottoman coins nailed to a wooden beam, and above the hearth a tiny sign carved in rough Arabic speech is silver. Silence is Turkish coffee. You laugh quietly. That's the thing about these places, they don't need to make sense. They just need to exist. Soft-lit chambers where thought can stretch its legs, where you can listen longer than you speak, where revolution starts in a whisper stirred clockwise. Eventually, you step outside again. The sky has shifted shades, not quite dusk, not quite day. Back at the palace, another tray waits, this one with 4 cups. Diplomacy isn't over yet. You return to the palace through a narrow hall that smells faintly of rose oil and charcoal. The air is cooler now, softer. Somewhere nearby, a lute is being tuned, its notes plucked carefully as if the musician is asking questions instead of making statements. Ahead, the coffee is ready again. But this time, you're not in the marble receiving rooms of before. You've been invited deeper to the harem. And no, not that kind of harem. Not the Hollywood mirage of endless silk pillows and synchronized fans. The Ottoman imperial harem is a world of structure, strategy, and subtle power. A place where the women of the court, wives, mothers, concubines, and servants, play politics more elegantly than any vizier in a gold-trimmed robe. You pass through a low archway, lanterns flicker along the corridor. Cushions line the floor like a runway for secrets. It's quieter here. Almost too quiet. A deliberate quiet. The coffee here is different too. Brewed by women for women. No loud proclamations, no smoky bravado. Just eyes meeting across porcelain and sentences wrapped in sweetness. The Sultan's favorite concubine may not hold a title, but if her coffee is shared with the valide sultan, his mother empires can pivot. You sit cross-legged on a violet cushion. The tray arrives carried by a woman in gold-threaded robes. No expression, just elegance. She places it down and leaves. There are 3 cups, only one is full. You hesitate, then choose the center. It's warm but not hot, sweet but not cloying. Brewed with cardamom and rose water, a blend favored in the harem's innermost circles. You sip and the room exhales. Here's your mainstream fact. Ottoman royal women weren't just idle beauties. Many were educated, multilingual, and fiercely involved in statecraft. The Valide Sultan in particular held enormous political influence. Some historians argue she was the de facto ruler during her son's early reign. And coffee, it was her chess piece. It's said that when tensions brewed between factions, the Valide would host a coffee hour. Invitations were rare and revealing. If your cup came with honey, you were in favor. If it was plain, proceed cautiously. If it was bitter, start packing. Here's your quirky tidbit. One Valide Sultan was rumored to use coffee grounds to read the future of rival concubines just to gain a psychological edge. Whether she believed the patterns or not was irrelevant. The fear they caused was the real asset. Historians still debate how much power these women truly held. The official records often minimize their roles, but the whispered letters, personal diaries, and sudden disappearances, they suggest otherwise. You take another sip. The woman next to you begins speaking, not directly, just nearby. She talks about the new ambassador from Venice, how he stirs his coffee too fast, how he wears gloves in July, how he brought gifts no one asked for. This, of course, is not idle gossip. It's reconnaissance. The harem in many ways is the empire's soft intelligence network. Every servant hears something. Every bathhouse visit reveals a fear. And every coffee tray sent from the women's quarters carries meaning. You feel something shift beside you. A young girl, barely 16, judging by her anxious fingers, leans over and whispers, "If the Sultan sends his cup back untouched, we worry. If he sends it back, scraped clean, we fear more." You blink. She smiles barely, because that means he was thinking while drinking. You don't ask what happens next. Instead, you thank her. The way you're supposed to, with a tilt of the cup towards her, then a turn clockwise. She nods. You've played the game correctly. From the shadows, a curtain shifts. It's time to leave the harem. As you step into the daylight again, blinking at the brightness, you realize something. Coffee diplomacy isn't just about what's said. It's about where it's said, who's watching, who pours, and which cup goes untouched. You've had 4 cups now, and the day isn't even halfway done. You step into a courtyard drenched in sun, blinking as if emerging from another realm. And in a way you are. The harem, with its coded glances and perfumed strategies, fades behind you like a dream you aren't entirely sure happened. What remains is the taste of rose water on your tongue and a quiet sense that you've just overheard a conversation between queens that never needed words. Now you're summoned again. Not to a grand chamber, not to the harem, but to a quiet annex just off the central courtyard, a modest shadowed room you might mistake for a servant's quarters, if not for the silk curtain drawn across its entrance and the 2 guards who flank it, like statues with better facial hair. Inside waits a man. One man, older, robed, calm. He is the Kahvecibaşı, the chief coffee maker of the court. You're not sure what to expect. A chef, a barista, a glorified kettle technician. This man is something else entirely. His bearing is almost priestly. He nods for you to sit, but doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. He begins the brew. This is not your usual stovetop affair. No flames, just hot sand in a bronze tray. The seziv, a long-handled copper pot, is nestled into the heated grains. Slowly, silently, the brew thickens, rising like a tide. You watch it foam at the rim, threatening to spill, and then he lifts it, just in time. Waits, repeats, 3 times, always 3. He pours. You don't ask for sugar. You wouldn't dare. The cup is passed, the rim is warm, the liquid inside velvet fury. This coffee doesn't ask for your approval. It assumes it. You sip. The Kahvecibaşı finally speaks. 1 bean too many, he says, and the Sultan thinks we want him awake. 1 grain less and he suspects poison. You nod slowly, not entirely sure if he's joking. Here's your mainstream truth. The Kahvecibaşı was more than a coffee brewer. He was a confidant, a protocol expert, and often a gatekeeper to the Sultan himself. In many ways, he knew the emperor's moods before the viziers did, judging by which cup was accepted, which tray was returned, or whether a 4th refill was declined. But here's the fringe detail you'll love. It's rumored that in some courts, the Kahvecibaşı trained in theatrical arts, not to entertain but to perform ritual. Every pour, every stir was choreographed, because in a court built on spectacle and silence, movement was meaning. Historians still argue whether the Kahvecibaşı ever directly influenced state policy. But you'd be amazed what power comes with knowing exactly when to arrive with a cup and when not to. You sip again. The coffee is different from every other you've tasted today. Earthy, almost mossy, less showy, more grounded. You ask him what beans he used. He tilts his head. From the garden. You blink. You grow coffee here. He smiles. No, but it's good to let people wonder. There it is. The real art of Ottoman coffee diplomacy, not just the serving, but the storytelling. The ambiguity, the layers of meaning stacked atop a single demi-tasse. He hands you a bowl of water and a small piece of mastic candy meant to cleanse the palate. Not because the coffee needs help, he says, because your tongue does. Rude, but fair. As you prepare to leave, he does something unexpected. He tilts your empty cup just slightly off-center on the saucer. You freeze. Back in the harem, someone told you that meant something. But what? He raises one eyebrow. It means, he whispers, you have permission to speak freely. You realize he's not just offering you liberty. He's also testing how much you know. You nod carefully. Then I'll say this, you reply. The coffee is flawless. He grins. So is your diplomacy. Outside, the wind carries the scent of cinnamon from a nearby kitchen. The call to prayer begins again, melancholy, familiar, and somehow more resonant after coffee. You've now met the man behind the tray. And you understand he's the quiet puppeteer pulling strings with steam and silence. The next time someone hands you a cup and says nothing, you'll know to pay very close attention. You drift through the garden beyond the annex, trailing your fingers along the leaves of fig trees and jasmine vines. Your thoughts move slower now, steeped in caffeine and layered meaning. Behind you, the Kahvecibaşı returns to his domain, vanishing like steam from a cooling cup. But the coffee journey isn't just within palace walls. You follow the scent of incense, now sweet, smoky warm, as it leads you toward a small domed structure just beyond the palace complex. There are no guards, no marble fountains, no gilded anything. Just silence and a door that swings open when you knock. Inside, the air is different, heavier, fragrant. You recognize the smell before your eyes adjust. Frankincense, roasted beans, wet wool, old wood. You've arrived at a Sufi tekke, a monastery of sorts. And here coffee isn't for diplomacy, it's for the divine. The dervish who greets you wears a long robe and carries a kettle like it's part of his arm. He speaks softly, guiding you to a low cushion near a brazier. The room pulses with quiet reverence. In the corner, a man chants something melodic in slow eyes closed body, gently swaying. Coffee is served in silence. Not because speech is forbidden, but because it's unnecessary. Here's your mainstream fact. Sufi mystics in the Islamic world were among the first groups to ritualize coffee. They used it not for leisure, but as a spiritual tool to stay awake during zikr, their long sessions of chanting, prayer, and meditation that could stretch deep into the night. They believed coffee helped dissolve the physical barrier between the body and God, not by altering the mind, but by sharpening it. But here's the fringe detail you won't hear in textbooks. Some orders had such detailed rules about brewing and serving that the coffee ritual itself became part of the prayer. It had to be prepared with water drawn at dawn, stirred only with olive wood spoons, served in silence, and always shared. Historians still debate whether the early Sufi use of coffee influenced the wider Ottoman court, or if both developed their own parallel ceremonies. But the overlaps are uncanny, especially in how both treat the act of serving as something sacred. The dervish sets your cup in front of you. No saucer, no sugar. Just the cup resting on a folded cloth. You sip. It's not sweet, but it isn't bitter either. Somehow the flavor feels like stillness. Outside, wind whistles gently through narrow slits in the wall. It sounds almost like a flute. The man beside you begins to sway more deeply. Others join him. Soon the room becomes a slow orbit of human motion. Not wild, not performative, just movement anchored and ancient. Their arms rise like tendrils of incense. You watch sipping the steam from your cup, mirroring the soft spiral of their dance. And you realize something. This too is coffee diplomacy. Not between nations or generals, but between the soul and something larger. You finish your cup and place it gently on the cloth. The dervish nods, not to thank you, but to mark the ritual's completion. He hands you a small bag, inside a single scoop of ground beans. For the road, he says. You step outside into the late afternoon light. The city hums again. Horses clip-clop past. Children chase each other between vendor stalls. But you carry something now, a quiet understanding. Not all coffee is political. Not all is poetic. Some is sacred. And some simply keeps you awake long enough to remember who you are. You walk downhill now past the palace walls and out through the quieter lanes of the old city. The buzz of the bazaar hums in the distance. But here the streets are lined with quiet homes, modest fountains, and cats that seem to govern with their own passive authority. The sky tilts golden. Late afternoon. You round a corner and stop short. A wooden door hangs open. The smell of smoke and spice coils out. Inside, a group of men hunch over backgammon boards. The coffee house has returned, not the kind with diplomats and velvet cushions, but the everyday version. Street level, alive. You step in. It's dim, lit by hanging lanterns and low windows dusted with soot. Brass trays balance precariously on narrow counters. The air is thick with tobacco cardamom and sweat. Someone's roasting chestnuts in the corner. A cat is asleep under a stool, absolutely unbothered. You order a cup with a look. No need for words. The Kahvecibaşı coffee server nods, already pouring. The save bubbles quietly over a coal bed. Then it hits you. This isn't just coffee for the people. This is resistance. You sip your cup and listen to the table of poets arguing the finer points of Persian metaphors, to the merchant complaining about tariffs, to the old man muttering about the vizier's nephew's third wife's cousin's scandal. Here's your mainstream truth. In the 17th century, Ottoman sultans repeatedly attempted to ban coffeehouses, claiming they were breeding grounds for sedition, vice, and laziness. Murad IV, yes, that Murad famously declared that anyone caught in a coffeehouse would face punishment as severe as those caught drinking alcohol. He even disguised himself to catch offenders. But the bans never stuck. Why? Because coffeehouses were never just coffeehouses. They were social engines. Here, classes mixed, news traveled, ideas percolated. And more than once, revolts began with whispered conversations over thick, bitter brews. Here's your fringe detail. To circumvent bans, some coffeehouses disguised themselves as barbershops or herbal medicine stalls. A man would come in for coriander and leave with a cup of steaming subversion. Others operated entirely underground, literally hidden beneath homes, accessed only by coded knocks. Historians still debate whether these bans were genuinely moral or just political slights to keep a restless populace quiet. But one thing's clear, people never gave up their coffee. You sip slowly. The man next to you leans in. He's got ink on his fingers, a cracked thumbnail, and the voice of someone who's been lecturing for 60 years. They banned it again today, he says, nodding toward the doorway. We're all criminals now. Then he smiles. The whole room laughs, quiet, defiant. You laugh too, though you don't fully know why. Maybe it's the caffeine. Maybe it's the feeling of shared rebellion of community, forged over clinking cups and soft curses. A waiter drops another tray of cups on your table, each with its own flourish, one topped with foam like a mini mountain, another stained dark with molasses. No two are identical. No one seems to mind. This isn't courtly ceremony. It's chaos with charm. A storyteller takes the floor of Madad just like you heard about. He holds up a spoon. This, he says grandly, is not just a spoon, it is a sword, a paddle, and when you have children, a holy relic. The crowd chuckles. He launches into a tale about a foolish merchant, a jealous rooster, and a cursed bag of sugar. You can't follow every word, but it doesn't matter. The rhythm carries you, the coffee keeps your eyes open, the warmth spreads deeper, you lean back. For a moment, time stretches. No sultans, no viziers, just a room full of people who refuse to be quiet. The storyteller ends his tale with a bow and a final joke. You don't catch it, but the table next to you bursts into laughter so loud the cat stirs. You finish your cup, the grounds settle thick and black at the bottom. You flip it onto its saucer. The man beside you raises an eyebrow. You want your future red, you nod. Why not? He picks it up, examines the pattern inside and whispers, "You're on a long journey." But you already knew that. You smile. As you step outside again, the sun is dipping low. The street is soft with shadow. The smell of coffee clings to your sleeves like a borrowed memory. The revolution may not be televised, but it will be brewed. You make your way back toward the palace, moving slowly now, like sediment sinking to the bottom of a cup. Istanbul glows in that honeyed hour just before dusk, when the domes blush gold and the Bosphorus ripples like silk under a fan's gentle breath. You turn onto a side street, quieter, more elegant. The walls here are carved, not crumbling. You recognize the feel of money under your feet, less from the stone and more from the silence it buys. A tall man in crisp robes waves you through a side gate. No words, just a nod. You're about to meet someone special. Mimar Sinan. Yes, that's Sinan. Architect to the empire. Builder of mosques, aqueducts, bridges, and dreams cast in stone. At nearly 90, he still commands a presence that humbles shadows. And today he's requested you join him for coffee. You pass through a simple doorway and into a room surprisingly modest. A single carpet, a drafting table, rolled scrolls stacked like treasure. But in the center, on a low stool, sits the man himself. White beard, thin hands, eyes that could measure a city without blinking. "Sit," he says. "You do." He pours the coffee himself. It's strong, almost sharp, like he designed it for maximum efficiency. No sugar, no delay, just brewed truth. Here's your mainstream gem. Mimar Sinan served under 3 sultans and is considered the greatest Ottoman architect of all time. He built more than 300 structures, most famously the Süleymaniye Mosque, a masterpiece of symmetry, light, and spiritual gravity. But here's the delightful fringe fact. Sinan was known to walk cities at night, sipping coffee from a portable kettle, observing how moonlight hit rooftops and how echoes bounced between minarets. He believed architecture should breathe, and coffee somehow helped him measure its lungs. You sip in silence. The walls in this room seem to lean inward, listening. He gestures to a scroll and unrolls it with deliberate care. It's a drawing of an unfinished mosque. You study the lines. They curve like waves. The dome is delicate but firm. What do you see, he asks. You hesitate. It looks like the shell of a walnut. He nods, pleased. Protection on the outside, complexity within. Then he points to your cup, same as that. You blink. He smiles. Architecture is coffee. It holds heat. It awakens. And when done well, it hums. You want to ask how one learns to design like him, to build beauty that survives centuries. But before you can speak, he lifts a hand. Listen, he says. You do. There's a sound, distant, barely there, a call to prayer, but not from a mosque. It's the echo off a minaret he placed 30 years ago, bouncing between courtyards, wrapping around arches until it lands here. That he says eyes closed is design. You look at your coffee differently now, the shape of the cup, the way the steam rises unhurried, even the rhythm of your sips. This is a kind of architecture too. Historians still discuss how much Sinan's work was influenced by mysticism, math, or politics. Some say he was a genius. Others say he had a genius team. Most agree it doesn't matter. The buildings still stand, the echo still arrives. He finishes his coffee and sets it down perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. You mirror him. He nods once deeply. You've passed the test. Or maybe there never was one. As you stand to leave, he offers you a parting gift, a tiny silver spoon. Elegant, lightweight, inscribed with a single word, denge, balance. You step outside, holding the spoon like a compass. The sun has nearly set now, casting long shadows that stretch like silk across the flagstones. You realize something. In a city built on trade power and ambition, it is coffee that binds it all. From the marble halls of sultans to the fingertips of an old architect with echoing eyes. You walk downhill and the wind carries the scent of roasting beans once more. Another cup awaits, always. You descend the hill with the kind of slow grace reserved for people full of caffeine and ancient insight. The city's rhythm has changed again. Lanterns flicker to life. Doors creak shut, and laughter spills from courtyards where dinner is still warm. You pass a boy delivering simmet rings of sesame bread strung along his arm like bracelets of sunrise. You're not headed to a palace or mosque now. You're going underground, literally. Past a row of shuttered shops and into a stone archway, half hidden by ivy, a staircase curls downward. The air cools, thickens, and begins to smell like smoke leather and memory. You've arrived at a place most tourists and even many nobles never see, the chess cafes of the Ottoman underground. You push open the heavy door and it's dimly lit. Oil lamps flicker. The ceiling is low and voices bounce like dice off stone. Every table is occupied, but no one is eating. No one is reading poetry. No one is listening to a meta. Here everyone is playing chess, and beside every board coffee, thick, still bubbling in some cases. No sugar here, no frills. This is battle brew. A man waves you over, gesturing to an empty stool. You sit. He nods, points to the board. Black or white? You choose black. He smiles like that was a mistake. Here's your mainstream fact: the Ottomans were obsessed with chess. By the 17th century, it had become not just a game, but a training ground for statesmanship. Military leaders, bureaucrats, even sultans were expected to know strategy on the field and on the board. Coffee and chess were a natural pair. One keeps your mind sharp, the other teaches you where to move when the world tilts. You sip slowly as the game begins. Your opponent opens with something elegant. You respond clumsily. He says nothing. Only drinks. The pressure isn't in the pieces, it's in the silence. Now, for your quirky fringe tidbit, in certain Ottoman circles, chess matches were used to rehearse diplomatic negotiations. Moves were discussed as metaphors. Pawns for peasants. Bishops for clerics. The queen always a scandal. When a match ended, it wasn't just about who won. It was about what had been said without being said. Historians still argue whether this strategic play influenced actual policy. But it's no coincidence that some of the most influential treaties of the 18th century were drafted by men who also played nightly in basements like this, beneath oil lamps and behind cups of dark, muttering coffee. You lose your first game. He refills your cup without comment. You begin again. The pieces glide, the air thickens, the coffee becomes part of the ritual, taken in between moves, never during. Each sip clears the mind. Each pause is weighted with analysis. You're starting to see it. The game is about timing, not talent. Knowing when to act, when to wait, When to sacrifice a knight because the pawn 2 moves behind is worth twice as much in 5 turns. It's war whispered. After your 3rd loss, your opponent finally speaks. You think too much, he says, sipping. Try listening. You frown. To what? He points to the board. The pieces are talking. So is the coffee. You stare at your cup. Steam rises slow and steady. He's not wrong. The game resumes. This time you drink before moving. And somehow you start to win. Not because you're better, because you're calmer. In Ottoman diplomacy, the calmest man often wins, because he sees more, waits longer, drinks deeper. After your narrow victory, your opponent smiles. Good, he says. Now go lose again. You both laugh. You rise, thank him, and leave your spoon by the board as a token. He pockets it like a coin and returns to the pieces. Outside, the city is ink and gold. Windows glow softly. The sea murmurs. You've played your part in a tradition older than strategy itself. The game beneath the empire, powered by beans and brains, cloaked in caffeine and courtesy. You walk home slowly, the taste of coffee lingering like a secret you've promised not to tell. You wake the next morning to the scent of rosewater and toasted bread drifting up through the latticed windows of your guest chamber. Outside, the rooftops shine with dew. Pigeons coo lazily from the domes of nearby mosques. You stretch like someone who has just been dream-fed knowledge. And now you're hungry again for coffee. Yes, but also for context. Today you're invited somewhere unexpected. Not a palace, not a cafe, a bathhouse. Specifically the women's hammam, a place where coffee brews as fiercely as the steam and gossip flows thicker than the perfumed air. Now don't worry, you're not about to barge into forbidden territory. You arrive invisible, drifting like a curious ghost through scented mist. No one sees you, but you see everything. The hammam is a world unto itself. Walls tiled in blue and white water, singing from spouts shaped like lion heads, steam curling upwards like incense. Inside, women lounge on marble slabs, their laughter echoing off the domes. This is not a quiet sanctuary. It's a lively engine room of society run by soap and secrets. In one corner, a group gathers around a brass tray, and there it is, coffee. Served not by servants, but by each other. Poured with flourish, offered with jokes, and taken without asking. The women here don't need permission. They pass cups and stories in equal measure. Here's your mainstream insight. Ottoman bathhouses were more than places to wash. For women, especially those of the upper class, they were networking hubs, matchmaking arenas, rumor incubators, and negotiation tables. Marriages were discussed, feuds settled, alliances tested, and coffee always present. Here's your fringe gem, the term guruku usulu. Traditional matchmaking often began in bathhouses over coffee shared between mothers, scouting potential brides or grooms. A slightly oversweetened cup might signal approval. A lukewarm one, not so much. Historians still argue whether bathhouse culture empowered women or reinforced certain roles. But what's beyond dispute is that in the steamy world of towels and tiles, women held court, and coffee was their scepter. You watch as a young girl approaches an elder woman, cup in hand. She offers it with 2 hands, an old signal of respect. The elder sips, nods, says nothing, then whispers something. The younger woman beams. You have no idea what just happened, but clearly something did. Elsewhere, 2 sisters argue over whether their cousin should marry a merchant or a poet. The coffee tray spins between them. The merchant has ships, says one. The poet has metaphors, says the other. Both drink, neither concedes. The bathhouse cat strolls past tail high, completely unimpressed. You drift deeper to a room where the steam is heavier, voices lower. Here, 3 women sit side by side, cups resting on their knees. They're not talking about marriage. They're talking politics. Yes, politics. One whispers about a new edict. Another heard from her brother's wife's neighbor's uncle that the Grand Vizier's health is failing. The third simply nods and pours more coffee, like she's fueling the conversation in real time. This is diplomacy bathhouse edition. Less formality, more foot scrubs. You wonder if the Sultan even knows how many of his empire's social shifts begin right here beside a carved soapstone basin over a pot of strong, bitter brew. You catch one more interaction before you float out. An older woman presses a small wrapped bundle into a younger girl's hand. Dried orange peel, she says, for your coffee. Keeps the mind sharp. The girl nods, bows slightly, and tucks it into her robe. No one says thank you. No one needs to. This is the realm of subtle, power-seasoned advice disguised as kitchen spice. Outside, the world is still drying itself from morning. You emerge into the street, skin not damp, but your thoughts steamed and stretched. You've seen how coffee doesn't only bridge nations and men, it fuses generations shared from hand to hand over tile and tail. You make your way toward the next cup, but this time you're listening harder, because now you know sometimes the strongest coffee in the empire is brewed behind marble walls with no throne in sight. You follow the scent again, less aromatic this time, more like possibility roasted over ambition. Istanbul is shifting. The sun is higher now, the streets louder. Horse carts jostle over cobblestones. Vendors chant their prices like street poets with agendas, and someone in the distance is definitely haggling too loudly over a goat. But you're not here for goats, you're here for boats. Because today the coffee leaves the city. You walk toward the docks to the port at Galata, where ships bob like impatient guests, ropes creaking, sails twitching, and seagulls plotting petty crimes. On the quay, men unload burlap sacks of treasure cloves, indigo, cardamom, and coffee beans. Always the beans. Only today the direction is reversed. Today coffee is leaving Istanbul bound for Europe. Here's your mainstream snapshot. By the 17th century, the Ottomans had established strong trade networks with Venice, France, and Austria, and coffee quickly became one of the empire's most intoxicating exports. What started as sacred fuel in Yemen and spiritual tonic in Sufi lodges was now fashionable stimulation for European salons and aristocrats with powdered wigs and questionable teeth. But it wasn't just bags of beans that traveled, it was ritual. The idea of coffee as conversation, coffee as ceremony, was slipping into the West one porcelain cup at a time. You hop aboard a ship bound for Venice, and within days, okay weeks, but we're dream skipping, you arrive at a bustling port market where Ottoman traders haggle in half a dozen languages. Silk saffron sugar, and coffee. Here's the fringe tidbit you'll sip with delight in Venice. The first cafes that served coffee were often disguised as apothecaries because authorities weren't quite sure if it was a medicine, a narcotic, or just a very bitter joke. Some even prescribed it for melancholy and indigestion, which, to be fair, it does help. Historians still debate which European city had the first coffee house, Venice, Paris, Oxford. But what's clear is this: the concept of the Ottoman coffee house was what truly stuck. In Vienna, Kaffeehauser. In London, penny universities. In Paris, salons where philosophers sipped slowly and forgot to pay. But it all started here at this dock with Ottoman ships loaded with beans and brewing methods, serving spoons and small cups in the kind of cultural influence that didn't arrive by army, but by aroma. You follow one merchant, Yusuf, by the look of his embroidery, as he enters a Venetian townhouse with a tray balanced like diplomacy itself. Inside, Italian nobles sit around a table arguing over what coffee even is, a soup, a sauce, a trick. He pours carefully. They sip. They wince. It's intense, one mutters. Yusuf says nothing. Instead, he pulls a tiny silver spoon from his belt pouch and drops a cube of sugar into the next cup. They sip again. Silence. Then, oh, and just like that, coffee takes root. Across Europe, demand grows. Ottomans watch with equal parts pride and eye roll. The Europeans are fascinated by the coffee, but completely baffled by the etiquette. They don't understand why the cups are so small, why there are no handles, why it's thick as stew. So they improvise, and they get it very wrong. You'll hear more about that later. For now, you drift back toward Istanbul, riding the aroma trail in reverse. The dock workers are still moving their hands stained with spice, their eyes narrowed against the sun. A boy runs past carrying a tray of 6 coffees stacked precariously, not spilling a drop. You nod in respect. You've now seen coffee as a gift, as a bargaining chip, and as a cultural bridge. And tonight you'll see it used as a weapon. But for now, pause. Let the salt wind cool your cheeks. Let the taste of imported sweetness sit on your tongue. The empire has made its move. Europe just doesn't know it yet. You're back in Istanbul, but not for long. Today you've been summoned to a meeting where lace cuffs and oil-slick mustaches collide. The French embassy has requested an audience. And in true Ottoman fashion, the answer is only if there's coffee. You glide into the reception hall just as the diplomats are adjusting their wigs. It's a sea of satins and side-eyes. Perfumed letters have been exchanged for weeks, but now the real work begins over cups, not contracts. The Ottoman envoy, dressed in layers of brocade, sits motionless. Except for one detail, his fingers rest lightly on the handleless porcelain finjan in front of him. He hasn't lifted it yet. That's intentional. Across the table, the French ambassador shifts awkwardly. He clears his throat. His velvet doublet makes a whip sound every time he moves. The coffee tray arrives. Silence falls. The pour is slow, measured, almost musical. The Ottomans understand that the real negotiation is not what is said, but when the coffee is poured, how it's sipped, and who drinks first. Here's your mainstream historical nugget. The 17th and 18th centuries were filled with diplomatic exchanges between the Ottomans and the courts of Europe, especially Louis XIV of France, who was fascinated with Oriental customs, so much so that he built mock Turkish gardens and staged Turkish-themed banquets at Versailles. But the Ottomans, they remained unimpressed. Coffee became one of their most subtle weapons, not poison but coded. Sweet coffee meant agreement. Bitter coffee, caution. Coffee served too quickly implied urgency. Served too slowly, arrogance. And God forbid someone be served lukewarm, that might as well be a declaration of war. Here's your quirky detail during one famously tense meeting. The Ottoman side allegedly withheld coffee entirely until the French ambassador removed his hat indoors. Once he did, the cups were brought in and sweetened. Diplomacy achieved, dignity bruised. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans intended coffee to function as such a finely tuned diplomatic signal, or if the Europeans simply read too much into every gesture. But as you sit in this room now watching both sides hover over their cups like diviners, it's clear everyone believes that coffee means something. The French ambassador finally lifts his cup. He sips, his expression freezes. Is it too strong? Too hot? No. He smiles. Parfait, he murmurs. The Ottoman envoy doesn't respond. He simply sips his own cup a beat later. Perfect synchronization. A servant slides a small dish of lokum between them. The Frenchman picks one up, tastes and nods again. The treaty discussion begins not in words but in shared temperature, sweetness, and pacing. This is performance diplomacy. You watch closely. Every move is practiced. The servant refills only when the ambassador tilts his empty cup clockwise. No one needs to speak to make a request. Every refill is either permission or pressure. And here's the unspoken rule: the person who drinks the least holds the most power. The Frenchman is on his third cup. The Ottoman envoy barely halfway through his first. You now realize this is not just hospitality. This is strategy disguised as etiquette. And it works. By the end of the afternoon, the treaty is outlined, sealed with wax, and toasted ironically with water, not wine. As the ambassador leaves, he bows deeply. Your coffee, he says, is stronger than your cannons. The Ottoman envoy finally smiles. And cheaper, he replies. You float behind them as the French delegation steps outside, blinking into the Istanbul sun, clutching parchment, and perhaps wondering if they've been out-negotiated by beans. You've now seen coffee redefine diplomacy, not as a tool of hospitality, but as a chess piece on the world stage. As you wander back into the inner courtyards of the palace, you pass a gardener sipping from a chipped finjan while trimming roses. Even here, the ritual continues, and soon you'll see how coffee might save or sabotage an entire city under siege. But first, one more cup, just to prepare. The wind off the Danube is colder than you expect. You're no longer in Istanbul, not even close. You stand now on the outskirts of Vienna, and the year is 1683. The siege is underway. Ottoman tents stretch across the plains like a city made of silk and strategy. Horses snort, cannons glint, banners snap, and somewhere there's a pot of coffee still bubbling, because some habits die harder than empires. You wander through the Ottoman camp past scribes, janissaries, cooks, and an impressive number of hookah pipes. It's tense. The siege has dragged on for weeks. The Austrians won't yield, and winter is whispering through the grass. But the Ottomans, they aren't just soldiers, they're planners. They've brought everything with them: horses, engineers, astrologers, and coffee. Lots of it. You duck into a command tent. Maps litter the table. Generals argue in low tones. But near the brazier, a familiar ritual is unfolding. The camp Kahvecibaşı is ladling brew into a row of dented tin cups. The scent is unmistakable, bold, dark, tinged with cloves and burnt sugar. One general accepts a cup and mutters, "We'll take the city before the ground settle." He won't. Here's your mainstream history marker. The Second Siege of Vienna was the high-water mark of Ottoman expansion into Europe. Led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, the army nearly overwhelmed the city until a combined force of Austrians and Poles, led by King Jan Sobieski, turned the tide. But here's your delightful fringe fact. When the Ottomans retreated, they left behind hundreds of bags of coffee. At first, the Viennese assumed it was camel feed. Once someone brewed it, probably a bold lunatic, they realized they'd been gifted the secret to divine focus. and aggressive pastry consumption. From those abandoned beans rose one of the most beloved institutions in Europe, the Viennese cafe. Historians still debate the exact details. Was it really a man named Kolschitsky who discovered the beans? Did he start the first cafe? Or is that just charming myth? Either way, coffee's conquest of the continent accelerated after Vienna, not before. Back in the camp, you observe the Ottomans preparing for what they don't yet know is defeat. And still the coffee is served. Because even in retreat, there is ritual. You follow a young soldier to the camp perimeter. He pours himself a cup, hands shaking slightly, then spills half of it on the ground. For luck, he says, or ghosts. Same thing. He sips, his eyes sharpen. For one moment, he looks ready to take the world. Then the horns blow. Retreat. Chaos. Tents fall. Horses rear. Documents are burned. But the coffee, strangely, it continues brewing. No one has time to drink it, but the chezves remain on the coals, as if the empire itself can't bear to stop the ritual, even in panic. You slip through the confusion and into a tent already half-packed. On a table, a silver spoon, a small pouch of cardamom, and a handwritten note in Ottoman script. It reads, "If we lose the city, let us at least flavor it." The Ottomans vanish by morning. But the beans remain, and in their wake, Vienna does what Vienna always does, builds something elegant from something broken. The first cafe opens soon after, a blend of Ottoman technique, European flair, and an alarming affection for whipped cream. You arrive inside one now warm, bright, impossibly ornate. Mirrors on the walls, marble tables. Everyone sipping slowly, no one in armor. You hear a woman whisper, "They say the Turks left behind their curses." Her friend replies, "They left behind something better." You drink a cup made from beans that crossed deserts, rivers, and battlefields. It tastes like survival, and a little bit of grudging gratitude. You return to Istanbul, but the atmosphere has changed. The banners flutter more cautiously now. Courtiers whisper a little softer. Even the coffee seems darker, more reflective. You're back in the palace, but this time there's tension under the cushions and shadows that weren't there before. You're here for a private audience. The chamber you enter is silent, dim, and lined with velvet curtains. It smells of clove smoke, ink, and something metallic. Because this isn't just a coffee ceremony, it's a paranoia tasting. At the center sits a high-ranking official, his robes spotless, his eyes anything but calm. A small coffee tray rests on the table before him, one cup already poured. You notice something immediately. He hasn't touched it. A servant hovers, still, too still. You sit down carefully as if the furniture might bite. The room feels like it's waiting for something. And then the official speaks. "I've received 3 cups today." You blink. He raises a hand. 2 were expected, 1 was not. Ah, here we go. Here's your mainstream fact. By the 17th and 18th centuries, coffee had become so entrenched in Ottoman court life that it was no longer just ceremonial, it was also dangerous. It became a tool of poisoners, plotters, and quiet ambition. After all, what better moment to strike than when your enemy's lips are parting for a sip? You look again at the untouched cup. It's beautiful, painted with tulips, rimmed with gold, and potentially filled with death. Here's the quirky historical tidbit. One Ottoman Sultan, Abdülhamid, I was so paranoid about being poisoned, he employed a full team of pre-sippers to taste his coffee in order of rank. If one dropped dead, the next in line got promoted. Morbid, effective. And while this tale might be embroidered with exaggeration, it reflects a deeper truth. Coffee was trusted only as far as the hand that served it. Historians still debate whether any sultan was actually killed by poisoned coffee. Some say yes, others suggest the rumors were enough to destroy trust, and that really was the point. You watch as the official finally reaches for the cup, stops, changes his mind. He gestures for the servant. "Sip it." The servant doesn't flinch, just bows, takes the cup, and drinks. One long, slow pull, then silence. Everyone watches. Nothing happens. Yet, the cup is returned. The official waits another beat, then sips. One tiny mouthful. The room exhales. You don't know if the threat was real or just ritual, but either way, he won. In the Ottoman world, control isn't about speaking, it's about drinking unflinchingly. He offers you a cup, just as elegant, just as suspect. You take it, you sip. It's perfect. Cinnamon, cardamom, and an aftertaste of high-stakes diplomacy. You glance down. The grounds at the bottom form a curious swirl, almost like a snake coiled around a spoon. You set it aside, just a little off-center. The official notices. He nods. "Good," he says. "You've learned the language." You leave the room, pulse steady, but only just. Outside, the sky is bruising into twilight. The lamps are being lit. Somewhere, a muezzin calls the faithful to prayer. But here in the center of power, faith is placed in fewer things. Coffee is one of them. You've now seen it used as a weapon, not to wound, but to worry, to pressure, to unsettle. And the empire still runs on it. You wonder how many decisions were made not in council chambers, but in rooms like that over cups that trembled slightly as they were passed. Probably more than we'll ever know. But don't worry, your next cup will be safer. Probably. You walk the cobbled streets of Istanbul again, your steps a little lighter now that the poison has stayed theoretical. The sky is deep blue silk, stitched with gold as lanterns flicker to life across minarets and alleyways. You pause at a corner stall greeted by a boy no older than 12, boiling coffee over hot coals with the calm confidence of someone who doesn't yet know fear. 2 sugars, he asks. You nod. This is a side of coffee that doesn't carry threat or theater, just warmth, steam, simplicity. But your journey tonight isn't through the stalls and spice-laced streets. You're about to watch something awkward, because while the Ottomans were perfecting the coffee ceremony into an art form, Europe was absolutely butchering it. The French thought the coffee pot should be boiled like a soup. The British decided to filter it. Why not strip it of character? And the Italians, bless them, were still years away from their espresso enlightenment. But none fumbled the cup quite like early Vienna. Let's rewind. It's the late 1600s. The Ottomans have retreated from Vienna, leaving behind their beans pots and brewing gear. Austrians baffled poke the strange blackened contents of burlap sacks, sniff them, boil them, and of course add milk. A lot of it. Here's your mainstream fact. The Viennese did develop a uniquely elegant coffee culture, complete with melange coffee, with milk and foam elaborate pastries, and cafes as social salons. But in the early days, it was a mess. Beans were over-roasted, grounds weren't settled. Sometimes they were steeped overnight like herbal tea. There was even a rumor that coffee needed to be cured by storing it next to garlic and onions. Spoiler, that did not help. Here's the fringe delight for tonight. Early European cafes often included live animals, a sort of marketing gimmick imported from traveling Ottoman caravans. One cafe in Paris kept a monkey in a waistcoat trained to grind beans. The monkey once escaped and caused mild chaos involving pastries, a bishop, and a feathered hat. No one drank coffee that day. Historians still argue whether these stories are exaggerated, but old cafe records do mention animal entertainment as part of the ambiance. Let's just say the Ottomans never once served coffee with a goat on a leash. You sit now in a recreated Viennese cafe. The chandeliers are crystal, but overcompensating. The cups have Handel's heresy, and someone just asked for whipped cream before even tasting the brew. You sip. It's fine. But you miss the Ottoman version, thick spiced, mysterious. Still you watch as the cafe fills with painters, poets, and men in starched collars arguing about revolutions. Because here's the thing, even bad coffee once shared becomes culture. You drift toward the window and watch as a waiter delivers a cup with a flourish, so exaggerated it spills. The customer smiles anyway. It's not about perfection, it's about participation. Coffee has made it, not just to Vienna, but to Paris, London, Berlin, Warsaw. It's now the currency of conversation across a continent that barely knew how to pronounce chesva. Even so, the Ottomans watch with amusement. They hear about how Europe grinds beans too fine, too coarse, brews them too long, or too little serves them with lemon peel, or heaven help us, sweetened condensed milk. You return to Istanbul with a phantom grin on your face. You enter a quiet cafe tucked behind a mosque, where the only decoration is a line of calligraphy that reads, "Patience like coffee must be brewed slowly." A cup is placed before you. No handle, no cream, no monkey, just perfection. You sip. It coats your tongue like dark velvet and lingers like wisdom. And you realize something. Even if Europe boiled it wrong, misread the rituals, and added too many garnishes, the idea made it through. Coffee is now everywhere. And the Ottomans, they knew it would be. Because long before it was trendy, before it was Instagrammable, before it was a morning addiction, it was already a philosophy. The call to prayer rolls across Istanbul in low honeyed tones echoed by the slow rising of morning mist over rooftops and domes. But today your journey takes you further southward beyond the Ottoman heartlands to where the story truly began. You arrive in Mecca centuries before coffee graced a single gold-rimmed saucer in Topkapi Palace. Here the air is dry, but the scent of coffee hangs thick and warm in the breeze. This is not the coffee of porcelain cups and diplomatic silences. This is the coffee of dawn prayer, desert fatigue, and divine intent. You sit among Sufi mystics, their robes simple, their hands gentle. They prepare the coffee over a low fire, not in copper pots, but in earthenware bowls, carefully watched and slowly stirred. Their movements are less ritual than rhythm, like prayer disguised as habit. The coffee is strong, bitter, unadorned. No cardamom, no sugar, no fanfare, just wakefulness. Here's your mainstream truth coffee as a spiritual aid emerged among Sufi orders in the 15th century, particularly in Yemen, used to help dervishes remain alert during dhikr, repetitive chanting of divine name. Coffee became known as the milk of thinkers. It was a tool not of indulgence, but of focus. It was not served for taste, but for clarity. The Sufi you're sitting with now offers you a cup. He says nothing, just nods. The taste is sharp, earthy, almost confrontational. It demands your attention just as the chants rising around you demand presence. You sip, and in the echo of the chanting, soft swirling eternal, you understand something profound. This is the origin and also the essence. Here's your fringe delight. Early coffee was brewed not in individual pots, but in large communal vessels, then poured into bowls and shared. Sometimes herbs were added not for flavor, but to prevent emotional disconnection. The drink was believed to sharpen spiritual vibrations, not just keep eyelids open. And yes, coffee was controversial even here, because when something stirs the spirit, it often stirs suspicion. Historians still debate whether the first bans on coffee occurred in Mecca itself during the early 1500s. Some say conservative clerics worried about its stimulant effect during prayer. Others feared gatherings around coffee would become forums for sedition. Sound familiar? But Sufis defended it fiercely. They argued that if wine could numb the soul, then coffee could awaken it. That it wasn't an indulgence, it was a bridge to devotion. Back in your present moment, the Sufi beside you lifts his cup in a silent toast. You do the same, and suddenly you're no longer in Mecca. You're in a remote mountain town in Yemen centuries later, watching farmers pick red cherries from trees clinging to steep slopes. The beans are laid out to dry on woven mats turned by hand under a searing sun. It's laborious, dusty, and slow, but sacred. Because they know these beans, these exact ones, might end up in Cairo, Damascus, Istanbul, or even Vienna, carried by camel ship in rumor. Here's the journey from Sufi bowl to imperial court, from spiritual tool to diplomatic instrument, and along the way, always the same thread connection. Coffee doesn't just wake people up, it brings them in. You sip again. The chant fades, but the clarity lingers. The sun climbs higher. Birds circle the minarets. And you realize this story didn't begin in a palace. It began in prayer with hands cupped not around porcelain, but around purpose. The desert gives way to dust trails and salt wind as you follow coffee's journey back north this time, not in caravans, but through rituals finely tuned over generations. You're carried across dunes and hills until you land gently in the heart of Bedouin country. Here, hospitality isn't written down, it's performed. You approach a tent, low slung and pinned down with stones against the desert breath. A man stands outside, arms folded, silhouette strong against the setting sun. He doesn't wave, he doesn't speak, but he nods. That means yes, you're welcome. Inside, the world contracts. Rugs line the ground, fire crackles low in a sand pit. There's no silver, no porcelain, just tradition, dense and quiet. And in the center, a brass coffee pot, the dala nestled beside a tray of tiny cups called finjan. This is where you learn the rules, and there are many. Here's your mainstream insight. Bedouin coffee culture is among the most codified in the Arab world, with a complex set of gestures, ingredients, and sequence that signals everything from respect to rejection. Brewed from lightly roasted beans and flavored with cardamom, sometimes saffron, or cloves, it's a drink more ceremonial than casual. You watch the host grind the beans with a wooden mortar, its rhythmic clacking echoing across the tent like distant hoofbeats. The coffee is brewed slowly over the flame, poured from a high arch into your cup with one steady motion. He offers it to you with his right hand, always the right holding the finjan between thumb and forefinger. You take it, nod once, and sip. It's different from what you've had before, lighter in color, sharper, slightly earthy, with a peppery undertone. It's not sweet, but somehow it feels generous. He watches silently, because here's the rule: the first cup is called al-daif, the guest cup. It's an offering. You must drink it. Refusing it is a cultural slap across the tent flaps. You drain it in one sip. He refills it, Second cup, al-kifaya, the satisfaction cup. You drink it if the first pleased you. Third cup, al-saif, the sword. A gesture that says, I'm with you even in battle. A fourth cup, rare, but sometimes offered in friendship or in grief. Here's your fringe delight in some Bedouin tribes. The number of cups accepted and the way you tilt the empty finjan while handing it back can indicate your intention. Hospitality accepted, neutrality claimed, or even the declaration of a vendetta settled. No words needed. You finish your third cup and tilt the finjan slightly with a gentle shake. It's the universal sign, no more thank you. The host nods, and only then does he allow himself a sip. Historians still argue whether the Bedouin coffee codes influenced Ottoman court rituals or whether both drew from even older Arabian customs. But what's undeniable is the precision with which every pour, every tilt, every sip is read. In the desert where trust is currency and betrayal, lethal coffee speaks clearer than poetry. You glance at the tray again. The dala is cooling the fire low. The conversation still hasn't begun. That's also part of it. In Bedouin etiquette, you don't speak before the cups are exchanged. Words come after the coffee, and when they do, they're sparse-weighted. How is the weather in your country, the host finally asks. You smile, it's always trying to decide. He laughs, you've passed. He offers dates, soft, honeyed, perfect contrast to the sharpness of the brew. A gesture of balance. Another signal you are no longer just a guest. You are under his protection. Outside the tent, the stars arrive one by one like slow applause. The desert winds settle. You sit a little longer, warmed by the fire, and something deeper, a sense that coffee at its oldest is not luxury or performance. It is trust distilled. And the next time someone hands you a cup without a handle, you'll hold it like you're holding a promise. The desert fades behind you like the last warmth of a fire, and you're on the move again, this time north, toward colder winds and stiffer uniforms. The hills rise up, the language shifts, and the coffee grows darker, grittier, and somehow louder. Welcome to Belgrade, deep in the Balkans, and once a crucial outpost in the far-reaching Ottoman realm. Here along cracked stone streets and fortress walls, Ottoman influence still clings like moss. But it isn't the soldiers or merchants who call your attention tonight. It's the janissaries. You hear them before you see them, boots stomping sabers, clinking voices low but sharp-edged. Elite guards of the Sultan, they're trained, brutal, brilliant, and deeply caffeinated. Because even the fiercest warriors know war plans go down smoother with coffee. You slip inside a coffee house tucked under a sagging wooden sign. The room is dim, smoky, full of mustaches and murmuring. You might mistake this for a tavern, but no wine flows here, only the bitter churning brew served in tin cups with chipped edges and endless refills. Here's your mainstream takeaway. The Janissaries, the Sultan's elite corps, were known not just for military prowess, but for shaping urban life in the provinces. Wherever they were stationed, Sarajevo, Skopje, Belgrade, they brought their coffee culture with them. They built cafes, social clubs, chess houses. Off the battlefield, they were urban organizers, opinion makers, and serious coffee addicts. You spot them now in the corner, a group of 5 hunched over a board. It's not chess, it's tabula, a backgammon-like game that unfolds with intensity. Between moves, they sip, never spilling, never flinching. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Some Janissary units reportedly used coffeehouses as recruitment stations. If a young man could hold his coffee without twitching and match them game for game, he was considered temperamentally stable. You didn't just prove strength on the training field, you proved it in the cafe. The leader of the group slams his cup down gently but with meaning. He leans back and speaks in a deep voice laced with command. 4 governors fall, he says, but the man who controls the coffee house controls the city. You're not sure if it's metaphor or memo, maybe both. Historians still argue how much power the Janissaries wielded off the battlefield. Officially, they answered only to the Sultan. Unofficially, they could tip local elections, boycott unfair taxes, and on more than one occasion overthrow a vizier. And always they met in coffee houses. You walk past the back wall where someone has painted a map of the Ottoman Empire, not in ink, but in coffee stains. It's abstract, swirls and puddles. But still, it feels accurate. Because these places weren't just hangouts. They were field offices, where rumors were weighed, alliances forged, and revolutions stirred 3 beans at a time. You take a seat near the fire. Your cup arrives. No frills. Just black liquid in a copper-stained vessel. One Janissary nods at you, not with friendliness, but with assessment. He's watching how you drink, how fast, how steady. You lift the cup. Sip slowly. Say nothing. Another nod. You're in. No one claps. No one smiles. But one of them scoots a piece of wood across the board and gestures for you to play. You do. And you realize that even here on the edge of empire, in a place more used to conflict than conversation coffee, is the same language. Strong, unforgiving, full of strategy, and shared in silence. As the night deepens, the fire crackles. Cups are drained. The game unfolds. The air hums with tension, not violence. You're not sure who's winning, or if it matters, because the point isn't the game. It's the gathering. It's the fact that these warriors sworn to steal an empire still believe in the power of a hot drink passed hand to hand. Outside, frost gathers on the cobblestones, but inside the room is warm, alive, and the empire, at least for tonight, holds. Morning creeps into Belgrade like a careful thief, soft-footed, silvery, and full of secrets. You slip out of the Janissary Cafe with a belly full of coffee and the faintest buzz of adrenaline. Behind you, the soldiers are still playing. No one ever really leaves those tables. They just step away and hope their seat is still warm when they return. But today you drift somewhere gentler. You're not following soldiers now, or spies, or Sufis. You're stepping into a salon scented with rosewater lemon balm and fresh ground mocha. Welcome to the world of Ottoman noblewomen and their afternoon coffee courts. You step through a garden of pomegranate trees and lilac bushes into a tiled pavilion that feels like the inside of a jewelry box. Velvet cushions, hanging lanterns, silk slippers abandoned near the door, and in the center a tray of finjan cups. Delicate, colorful, rimmed with silver filigree. Here, coffee isn't poured with suspicion or strategy. It's poured with poetry. A young woman offers you a cup with 2 fingers and a practiced smile. She says nothing. The conversation hasn't started yet. Not until everyone's cup is full. You take your seat. Here's your mainstream takeaway in upper-class Ottoman society. Women gathered for afternoon coffee hours known as Kahvecibaşı coffee conversations. These were no idle chats. They were rich with storytelling, matchmaking schemes, intellectual exchange, and creative expression. Many women of the court were highly educated, fluent in poetry, music, and philosophy. And coffee was their permission slip to shine. Here's your fringe delight. Noble women sometimes held finjan readings, not for fortune-telling, but as icebreakers. One guest would invent a story based on the coffee grounds left in another's cup, often turning it into a flirtatious fable or a veiled commentary on the person's romantic entanglements. Sometimes the laughs were genuine, sometimes they were strategic. The host today is a middle-aged woman with a gaze like cool steel and a laugh that arrives in sharp, elegant bursts. She introduces her guest with flair, a poet, a merchant's wife, a calligrapher who once designed prayer scrolls for the Sultan's sister. Each woman sips her cup, slowly cradling it like a thought half-formed. Then conversation blooms. The poet shares a new verse. It's about longing, but also lemons. The calligrapher responds with a short tale, possibly invented, possibly true, about a love letter carried by pigeon that never arrived. Laughter, a refill, a toast to all the birds that got lost. Here's the unspoken rule: if a woman refills your cup before you finish it, means she wants you to stay. If she waits too long, start thinking of polite exits. You finish your first cup slowly. It's gently spiced rose petals and a whisper of orange zest. The woman beside you leans in. Your grounds, she says, look like a lion curled at the foot of a tree. You blink. Is that good? She smiles. If you like lions. Historians still argue about the role of women in the spread and refinement of Ottoman coffee culture. Some say they were merely recipients. Others insist they were innovators, crafting the flavors, rituals, and meanings behind the scenes, then passing them down like heirlooms with every pour. Either way, it's clear in these courts of cushions and conversation, coffee was more than drink. It was expression. A woman across the room begins playing a kanun, a kind of zither, with a voice like a sunbeam filtered through silk. The notes weave between the chatter, grounding it, lifting it like a well-written reply. You take another sip. This is not political coffee. It's not military, not spiritual. It's relational. It's about sharing time, flavor, and cleverness. About turning an afternoon into art. You stay until the sunlight turns amber and long shadows stretch across the tiled floor. When you rise to go, the hostess refills your cup one last time and says, "One for the road." That's not tradition, that's kindness. And you carry it with you, cup still warm, back into the city where coffee will soon mean something different again. But here for this moment, it meant beauty. You step outside into the cooling twilight, the taste of rose-kissed coffee still humming on your tongue. Istanbul stretches before you, its outlines softened by dusk, as if someone dipped the city in warm ink and let it blur at the edges. But tonight your path turns shadowed again. Because where there's trade, there's temptation. And where there's coffee, there's always contraband. You drift down to the spice docks where crates are stacked high and tarps flutter in the wind like nervous flags. Lanterns swing from hooks, cats prowl the edges. Men whisper in accents from across the empire. It smells like clove seaweed in danger. This is the underbelly of the empire's favorite drink. Here's your mainstream truth. By the late 17th century, the Ottoman state had strict controls over coffee production and trade. Coffee houses could be shut down, imports taxed, roasters regulated. But like anything beloved, coffee slipped through the cracks, hidden in baskets, disguised as herbs, smuggled under cloaks, sweetened with risk. Tonight you follow a man named Harun. He moves fast, but quiet. One hand on a sack of beans, the other holding a forged merchant token that claims he's transporting medicinal roots. You trail him through narrow alleys into the back of a tailor shop. There behind a false wall sits a secret roastery. The room is tiny hot and full of the scent of justice disguised as Java. Harun grins. Taxes are for the rich, he says, tossing a handful of beans into a pan. He's not wrong. Here's your fringe delight during especially restrictive periods. Coffee smugglers used hollowed-out watermelons to ferry beans through checkpoints. Some even trained pigeons to carry small pouches of roasted grounds across rooftops from illegal roasters to eager customers. Historians still argue whether these tales are true or the stuff of merchant folklore, but somewhere in the archives is an arrest warrant titled simply, "One man, 2 melons, and a smell too strong." You sit in the roastery watching as the beans roast over open flame. Harun grinds them, by hand pours water from a copper kettle, stirs slowly, pours carefully. This isn't factory speed coffee, it's resistance in liquid form. He hands you a cup. It's rough, overboiled, and gritty. It's perfect, because this is coffee stripped of polish, stripped of ceremony, served without sauce or without apology. It's the kind of cup that says we were never invited, but we came anyway. You sip, Harun watches. You've had palace coffee. You nod, he shrugs. Too clean. I like mine with a little dirt on it. You laugh. Because it's true, there's something more honest in the steam of this room than in 100 velvet salons. You look around and realize this isn't just a smuggling den. It's a meeting place. A young couple in the corner hunch over a shared cup, their knees nearly touching. A scholar reads by oil lamp cup, perched precariously on a stack of banned pamphlets. A man with a scar running from ear to chin drinks slowly, then leaves without a word. This is the coffee house, reimagined, unlicensed, unguarded, unfiltered. And the empire still runs on it, because for every rule, someone brews an exception. Harun pours a second cup. We don't have silver spoons, he says, but we've got better stories. You raise your cup, he raises his. No toast, just eye contact. The kind that says we both understand what this means. You leave through a back alley, no sign, no address. But tomorrow, someone else will find it, because flavor travels faster than fear. And this empire, for all its elegance, still belongs to the hands that grind the beans in secret. By now, your bloodstream is mostly coffee and curiosity. You've drifted through palaces, prayer rooms, powder wig salons, and clandestine roasting dens. You've seen how beans brew empires and rebellions alike. And now you cross the channel. Because even the rain-soaked island of Britain couldn't resist the pull of the Turkish cup. You arrive in London, 1650s. The streets are muddy, the air smells like coal smoke and old bread, and nearly everyone is either shouting about taxes or muttering about the Dutch. But tucked between the chaos, something new is brewing. A small wooden sign reads, Pasqua Rossi's Head, coffee for sale. Inside your first English coffee house. You push open the door and step into a room thick with tobacco smoke ambition and the overwhelming sense that no one has showered in weeks. No velvet cushions, no silver trays, just long wooden tables, ink-stained sleeves, and heated arguments about Latin declensions. Welcome to the world of penny universities. Here's your mainstream fact. In the 17th century, Londoners began frequenting coffee houses where for the price of a single penny, they could buy a cup of coffee and access the company of lawyers, poets, merchants, and radicals. Coffee houses quickly became hubs of political debate, stock gossip, scientific speculation, and of course, light treason. You take a seat near a window. Your coffee arrives in a mug chipped on 3 sides and filled with something vaguely resembling motor oil. You sip. It's horrifying. But it keeps you awake, which is the point. Here's your fringe tidbit. Early British drinkers found Ottoman-style coffee so bitter that they often added ale mustard seeds or even raw egg yolks to soften the brew. Some believed coffee could cure scurvy, impotence, or sadness. Others claimed it made you sterile, particularly dangerous in a time when legacies mattered more than hygiene. Historians still argue whether British coffeehouses democratized knowledge or just gave loud men a new place to shout. Either way, they exploded. By 1700, over 500 coffeehouses operated in London alone, each catering to a distinct clientele. Some were nicknamed Gresham's Exchange for stockbrokers, the Grecian for scientists, Buttons for writers and satirists, Malls for, well, let's say bawdy intellectuals. Back at your table, 2 men debate Newton's laws. A woman nearby mutters about tea being a foreign conspiracy. Another man claims coffee has helped him write 17 pamphlets this week alone. Someone spills a mug. No one notices. You lean back, absorbing the energy. It's messy, it's democratic, it's loud, and it is in its own unwashed way profound. Because here coffee isn't about elegance or etiquette. It's content fuel. It's the engine of manifestos and money markets. A new empire is brewing this time with quills and ledgers instead of scimitars. You finish your cup. The sludge at the bottom could power a carriage. The man across from you belches and announces the founding of an insurance company. Spoiler, he'll call it Lloyd's. You step out into the drizzle. The rain doesn't bother you. You're warm from within, caffeinated and curious. You've now seen how the Ottomans exported something more than beans. They exported a model of gathering, of sharing, of structured spontaneity. Britain may not have inherited the rituals, but it embraced the chaos. And even now, when you walk into a cafe in Soho or Oxford, when you overhear someone whispering about markets or poems or revolutions, there's a little Ottoman ghost smiling behind the bar. You walk on. Your next cup awaits. You return once more to the Ottoman palace, but things feel different. The carpets are still immaculate, the finjan cups still gleam, but the conversations have turned tense. A treaty hangs in the air like fog that refuses to lift, and once again coffee is the battlefield. You're seated in a room thick with diplomatic perfume, rosewater, burnt orange peel, the unmistakable hum of people pretending to be civil. Across from you sits an ambassador from a neighboring empire. He smiles, but not with his eyes. The coffee arrives, 3 cups, all identical, but only one is offered to the guest. He takes it, raises it, sniffs, pauses. He doesn't drink. Instead, he sets the cup down carefully, deliberately, without even tasting it. The Ottoman vizier's expression doesn't change. Not outwardly, but the temperature in the room seems to drop by 3 degrees. You've just witnessed a rejection, and in the world of Ottoman coffee diplomacy, it's not just about manners. It's message encoded in caffeine. Here's your mainstream insight. Across centuries, formal Ottoman negotiations often included coffee service as a critical indicator of tone. Treaties were signed with coffee, proposals accepted or delayed based on when or if the drink was poured. It wasn't dessert. It was a signal. And here's your delightful fringe flavor. Some diplomats became so adept at reading their coffee reception, they wrote secret guides on how to interpret Ottoman hospitality. One such guide warned that if your coffee arrived lukewarm and was served with no sweet, your proposal was likely dead in the water, even if smiles filled the room. Historians still debate how much these subtleties were intentional versus perceived, but there's no denying that in the Ottoman Empire, nothing about coffee was neutral. Back in the room, silence stretches. The vizier lifts his own cup and sips. The ambassador, seeing this, picks his up again, but now the timing is wrong. The rhythm broken. Whatever harmony once hovered above the steam has dissipated. The conversation proceeds, but the coffee has already spoken. Later in the hallway, a junior scribe mutters, "That's the treaty gone then." You realize now the cup didn't kill the deal. The refusal to honor its ritual did. You flash back to earlier days when cups were tilted slightly to communicate favor, when grounds were read like fortunes, when silence between sips said more than speeches ever could. This ambassador broke the code, and that code unspoken and old as empire matters. You follow the diplomat as he leaves the palace. He adjusts his robe with confidence, but his aide looks worried. They didn't refill, he whispers. Exactly. In this world, coffee is more than hospitality. It's an invitation to harmony. Decline the invitation deliberately or not, and doors close. Here's a secret sometimes in Ottoman politics: the real treaty wasn't the paper, it was the coffee. And once that bitterness lingers, it doesn't wash away easily. You return to the room, a new tray is brought out, just 2 cups this time. You're offered one, you sip. Warm sweet with just a hint of clove. The vizier leans in. So he says quietly, "Shall we begin again?" You nod. This too is how empires turn, not with cannons, but with cups. By now, you no longer walk through Istanbul, you glide. You move with the rhythm of the city's breath, guided by the scent of cardamom and firewood. You hear the gurgle of the tea before it boils. You know which shadow hides the best cafe, which alley carries cinnamon on the wind. And today, you're not just sipping coffee. You're meeting the ones who make it sing. You step into a neighborhood of quiet courtyards and busy hands. This isn't the palace or the port. It's the artisan quarter where Armenian craftsmen roast, grind, and pour with a passion that feels more like prayer than trade. Here's your mainstream truth: that the Armenians of Istanbul played a major role in refining and spreading Ottoman coffee culture. As skilled metalworkers, printers, and traders, they introduced new brewing tools, cup designs, and even helped codify cafe etiquette in both the capital and the provinces. You duck into a shop that smells like roasted history. Inside, an elderly man sits cross-legged beside a hand-cranked roaster, its bronze sides glowing with heat and polish. Beans tumble inside like tiny rolling secrets. His apprentice is grinding beans using a stone mill, the sound rhythmic and oddly soothing like rain on parchment. He nods at you. First time you smile? First cup, no. First real cup, maybe. He grins, then sit. And don't ask questions until your 3rd sip. You obey. He pours. The stream is slow, precise. The cup porcelain rimmed with copper is set before you like an offering. You wait, let the steam rise. You sip. It's earthy, not heavy, alive. He watches you with the quiet pride of someone whose whole life has been spent perfecting something the world keeps calling simple. Here's your fringe delight. Some Armenian coffee masters were so revered that they were invited to private courts in Europe to train royalty in the Ottoman way of brewing. One was even offered land in Vienna if he'd stay and open a school of coffee excellence. He politely declined. "The beans aren't the problem," he said. "The hands are..." You sip again. The second mouthful tastes different, smoother, rounder. The beans are roasted darker than palace blends, but with more patience. This isn't brewed for speed, it's brewed for presence. The man leans in. "We don't drink coffee to wake up," he says. "We drink coffee so we don't miss being awake." The shop is part roastery, part social salon. Neighbors wander and share stories, leave with tiny paper bags tied with string. On the wall hang cups from different eras, each with a crack, a stain, a story. You notice a ledger, names, blends, dates, clients you ask. "Friends," he replies. "Some drink here, some send servants." One man comes just to smell the beans. You sip your 3rd. It's perfect. Not because it's flawless, but because you're here for it, fully. Warm cups, steady hands, and a silence so deep it hums. Historians still debate how much influence Armenian brewers had on the broader Ottoman cafe scene. Some say they simply refined existing methods. Others argue they reinvented the entire sensory experience, merging craftsmanship with subtle hospitality. You think back to the palace, to the calculated pours and bitter refusals. Here, there's no performance, only practice. The man's daughter enters with a tray of sweets, rose, jam, pistachio, nougat, candied orange peel. "Try this one," she says, handing you a piece. It tastes like stories that don't end, and it does. You linger as long as you can, knowing that every other cup after this will carry this memory at its bottom. As you stand to leave, he places something in your hand, a coffee spoon, hammered bronze engraved with a tiny tulip. "For your kit," he says. "Every master has one." You nod. "But I'm not." "Not yet," he interrupts, "but you're listening." That's how it starts. You walk back into the city, heart full, hands, warm pockets, richer. And now when someone offers you coffee, you no longer just drink it, you read it. The city hums with twilight now, glowing windows, quiet wheels, the rustle of cloaks and gossip. You walk beside the Bosphorus, watching lantern light flicker across water like spilled sugar, slowly dissolving. But you're not here to stroll, you're here to strategize. Because in the back room of a modest guest house overlooking the strait, a game is being played, and the stakes an empire. You slip through a curtain into a room you've never seen, but instantly recognize low ceiling, long table, and coffee served in silence. The windows are shuttered, the air thick with scent leather-bound books, burnt cinnamon ink, and steam. There are no guards, no titles, just diplomats seated like players at a velvet-lined board, Ottoman, Persian, Venetian, Russian, robes and collars, frowns and folded arms, and at the center, a tray, 5 cups, 5 saucers, 1 pot, no documents, no translators. Just a shared language of raised brows, measured sips, and brewed patience. You take your place in the shadows and watch. Here's your mainstream context. Coffee diplomacy was more than grand receptions. It often took place in private gatherings like this, informal, unofficial, yet deeply consequential. In these meetings, territories were traded, alliances built, betrayals brewed. Every cup mattered. Here's your fringe gem. Some Ottoman diplomats used custom spice blends in their coffee to subtly guide mood. A hint of clove for warmth, cardamom for alertness, rose for nostalgia, a poorly timed dose of fenugreek negotiation poison. One Venetian diarist once claimed he could read a room better by sniffing the coffee than by listening to the words. Tonight you watch the Ottoman negotiator pour the first round. He doesn't speak, just pours, right to left, clockwise. Each cup filled with the same height, same arc, precision disguised as generosity. Then he waits. No one drinks first. They glance at one another. A nod from the Persian, a blink from the Russian. Then one by one they raise their cups and sip. Still no talking, because in this game words are second. The Ottoman sips last. That's the move. And now it begins. First offer a shared waterway in exchange for tribute. Silence. Second sip. A Venetian leans forward. Perhaps co-governance. No reply. Third sip. The Russian places a spoon flat on his saucer. That's the signal. Disapproval. A second cup is poured for everyone. This one cooler, sweeter. A fresh tactic. You realize this is a chessboard with steam, in every sip a shift in position. And here's the unspoken rule. The person who finishes their cup first must offer the next concession. The Persian does. A clause, a promise, a name. The Ottoman replies only with a refill. No acceptance, no refusal, just hot, fragrant time. Historians still argue whether these meetings produced more lasting agreements than formal treaties. But within the empire, they were known as the steam table, a term whispered in records where relationships were tested by temperature and alliances thickened like foam. You watch the cups empty again. Now the Russian diplomat stirs his with a spoon, 3 full turns, then clinks it against the rim. Another signal. Agreement. Unofficial, but understood. You lean in. A document is finally passed across the table. No one signs it, but everyone nods. The meeting ends not with handshakes, but with a final pour. This last cup is different, richer, darker, almost syrupy. This is the sealing cup. It's never offered unless the deal is done. And it always contains cardamom, not just for taste, but for symbolism. Truth preserved, memory awakened. They drink, they rise. They leave one by one, cloaked again in the polite facades of international theater. But you saw what really happened. You saw how coffee did what cannon fire couldn't. It moved borders without breaking glass. You stay behind, the tray still warm, the last ground still settling. You swirl your own cup gently and smile. Because sometimes the most powerful tool on the map isn't a sword, it's a spoon. The city sleeps, but not you. Not yet. You find yourself back in a quieter part of Istanbul, tucked into a courtyard where the jasmine is blooming despite the hour. A cat stretches along a warm stone bench. A wind chime tinkles once, then falls still. And waiting on a low wooden table beneath an olive tree, another tray. But this one's different. No finjans, no pot, just a single empty saucer, and beside it a small folded napkin with the faintest outline of a coffee ring. Strange. You sit, and then like clockwork, a figure emerges from the shadows carrying a copper pot and a stack of small white cups. He wears no badge, no insignia, but his presence is unmistakable. This is the listener, not a title you'll find in court records, but every empire has one. A kind of unofficial scribe, a messenger who remembers more than he writes. Someone fluent in the language of things not said. And tonight he's teaching you the secret orders of the saucer. Here's your mainstream truth. In Ottoman coffee etiquette, the way you returned your cup, how you placed it, tilted it, paired it with a spoon, or not spoke volumes. These weren't just habits, they were deliberate codes. A silent dialect understood only by those who had truly lived within the empire's walls. The listener pours. He hands you a cup with 2 fingers and says, Return it any way you like. Then he waits. You sip. It's strong, spicy, bitter at the edge, but warm in the center. You finish. Now the choice. Here's your fringe fact, placing the cup upright in the saucer. A sign of agreement. Laying it on its side. Dissent. Resting the spoon across the top. A plea for privacy. Upside down with no spoon. You've just delivered bad news or refused a proposal. You return your cup upright, then tilt it slightly to the left. He raises an eyebrow. Curious, he says. You're not finished speaking. He refills the cup. Same arc, same silence. This is what makes the listener special. He doesn't brew coffee to offer hospitality. He brews to decode. He's the human cipher of the empire, fluent in sip and gesture. It's said he once delivered a war warning to the Grand Vizier using nothing but 4 mismatched saucers in a tray arranged in a diamond. Historians still argue whether the saucer language was real policy or just charming folklore. But there are Ottoman letters sealed with wax in the shape of overturned finjan symbols that predate any written insult or promise. You sip again. This time you place the spoon diagonally across the top. He nods slowly. You want to know something others won't say. You smile. Correct. He sets down his cup and leans in. The trick, he says, is not what the coffee says. It's what you say with it when you're tired of using your mouth. You think about all the rooms you've sat in. The court, the cafes, the garden salons, the bathhouse benches, the war tents, the secret roasteries. And you realize in everyone the coffee spoke first, even when it said nothing at all. The listener finishes his own cup and places it down gently upside down with no saucer. You blink. A bold move. He grins. Time to disappear. And just like that, he's gone. You look down at your own tray. Still warm. The cups still bear fingerprints of the spoon's tiny reflections of the night sky. You take one last sip, then set your cup slightly off-center, no spoon. You don't need a listener to explain what it means. You're ready for the next chapter. And the coffee it knows. Steam curls up from the Bosphorus like a whispered memory curling into the pre-dawn sky, as if the sea itself has taken to brewing. You step aboard a ferry just as the engines hum to life. The planks beneath your feet creak with age and stories. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, people are sipping coffee. Welcome to the floating cafe. This isn't ceremonial. No velvet cushions, no diplomacy, no polished silver. Just commuters and conversation gliding between continents. The ferry moves slowly across the water from the Asian side of Istanbul to the European shore. The deck is full of life newspaper readers, students with half-open textbooks, fishermen sipping between throws, lovers sharing earbuds in silence. And in nearly every hand, a paper cup, brown, recyclable, steam rising through the sea breeze. Here's your mainstream moment. For centuries, the Bosphorus ferries have connected the two halves of Istanbul, not just geographically, but culturally. And wherever people gather, coffee follows. It's the one ritual that survives rush hours, engine noise, and late arrivals. But even here, where speed rules and cups come with plastic lids, the rhythm remains. You take your place near the railing, sipping slowly as the shoreline drifts by. The coffee is simple, hot, slightly burnt, served from a thermos by a vendor who moves faster than gravity. But even this is part of the continuum, because now you understand it's not about the cup, it's about the pause. The man beside you slurps, loudly nods at the view. Only place left in the city where people don't pretend they're not tired, he says. You chuckle. He's right. Here's your fringe favorite. Some ferry vendors have their own following regulars who know the brew, the pour, the exact second to wave. A few conductors have even named their coffee flasks, decorating them with beads, charms, and football stickers. One ferry captain was once offered a bribe to switch routes. He refused because the other line didn't let him refill his coffee the right way. Historians may not spend much ink on ferry culture, but ask any Istanbul native, and they'll tell you the best thinking happens between peers. You finish your cup. The ferry sways slightly. A gull lands on the railing and stares at your empty sleeve with judgment. The man next to you offers his last sip. You decline. He shrugs, drinks it himself, and says, "Suit yourself. It's good until the third pier. After that, it gets philosophical." And he's not wrong. By the time you dock, the sky has gone pale gold. The city is waking up. More cups clink. More steps quicken. But the pause lingers. You carry the warmth with you. Not just the heat in your chest, but the reminder that even in the bustle, even in the blur of modern life, the Ottomans left behind more than empire. They left behind a rhythm. One sip, one gaze across the water. One ferry between past and present. And whether you're a janissary or a graphic designer, a vizier or a student late for class, you always hold the cup the same way. The ferry has long since docked, but the rhythm of that ride lingers in your bones. The soft churn of water, the warmth of a cup held between palms, the way time seems to stretch just enough to catch your breath. You wander through Istanbul's winding lanes, drawn by something quiet but magnetic. And there it is, a building tucked between taller, flashier neighbors. Its sign is faded, almost shy. The paint has peeled, but the door's open. You step inside what might be the oldest coffee house in Istanbul, or at least the one that's never closed. No grand announcement, no neon lights or TripAdvisor plaques, just creaking floorboards, smoke-darkened beams, and the comforting scent of beans that have never been in a hurry. You're not alone. Old men in flat caps play backgammon with slow deliberation. A boy sweeps quietly, pausing every few minutes to refill water glasses. At the back, a woman in her 60s pours coffee from a battered chesve, her hands moving with a memory that lives deep in the joints. She sees you, smiles. "New face," she says, handing you a cup without asking your preference. "But old soul," you take a sip, and oh, it tastes like time. Here's your mainstream marker. Istanbul is home to some of the longest continually operating cafes in the world, many of which have survived fires, floods, regime changes, and revolutions. They've hosted poets, rebels, teachers, taxi drivers, and sultans in disguise. And their greatest strength, they never tried to become something else. Here's your fringe gem during one attempted military coup in the 20th century, when tanks rolled down major streets and soldiers shouted in confusion. One such cafe reportedly stayed open the entire time. A regular customer, a retired janissary descendant, simply stood up, poured the soldiers coffee and said, "You'll need this more than bullets." They drank. No one fired. History gets blurry sometimes, but legends like this don't stick unless they feel true. You glance around. The walls are lined with fading photographs, couples on first dates, students with textbooks, men playing oud in the corner. One frame holds a black and white picture of the shop itself. Same windows, same counter, same lace curtains. Different century, different empire, same coffee. A man next to you stirs his cup lazily. "I've been coming here since I had hair," he says. "My father before me, same table." "Has it changed, you ask?" He laughs once. "Only the price." You realize this place isn't just a cafe, it's a memory that never forgets. Here people don't come to catch up on trends. They come to pause, to sit in a familiar silence, to sip something that connects them not to an algorithm, but to a lineage. You finish your cup. The woman behind the counter offers another. You nod. She refills without fanfare. There's no rush, no Wi-Fi, no foam art. Just hot, dark truth poured slowly and without apology. Historians still debate the origins of the first Ottoman coffee house. Was it Kivahan in Tatakale? Was it something smaller earlier, whispered between neighbors before it had a name? But this place, this one, it doesn't care about being first. It only cares about being there. And it has, through sultans and soldiers, through poets and pigeons, through weddings, breakups, thunder and song. You leave a few coins on the table and step out into the street. The breeze smells like cloves. The coffee still clings to your tongue. And behind you, the cafe door swings shut with a sigh, ready for whoever comes next. The sun is high again, casting crisp shadows on stone and awnings. Istanbul hums as it always does, trams clanging, street vendors, calling, a muezzin's voice coiling between buildings. You've walked its ancient spine, tasted its layers, felt its rhythm. And now you step into something deceptively modern. A glass door hisses open. Inside, quiet jazz. Soft lighting. Marble counters. A polished espresso machine that hisses back. The cups are uniform, the saucers symmetrical, and the menus laminated. Welcome to a contemporary Turkish cafe. It's the kind of place you'd find in any capital city, but you know better. You sit, you sip, and instantly the centuries flood forward. Because the coffee may be served in a larger cup, now less grit, more crema, but the spirit is unchanged. You glance around, two students whisper over a shared tablet. A woman in a headscarf reviews lecture notes between sips. A father and daughter play a word game, and a man in a wool coat types furiously into his laptop, brow furrowed, as if trying to rewrite the Constitution before his Americana cools. At the bar, a young man with a half-sleeve tattoo and a golden sesve pendant pours a traditional Turkish brew for an elderly woman. She doesn't look at the foam, she listens for the sound of the pour. It's perfect. She smiles, he exhales. Here's your mainstream truth. Modern Turkish cafes still serve Ottoman-style coffee, often alongside global brews. And while the decor has changed, the culture has not. People don't come here just for caffeine, they come to linger, connect, observe, and think. It's not fast, it's anchored. And here's your fringe delight in some neighborhoods young baristas apprentice under traditional brewers, learning the art of the system, the rhythm of the pour, and the unspoken etiquette of when to serve, when to speak, and when to let the coffee carry the silence. Historians still argue whether this fusion of old and new dilutes tradition or refreshes it. But look around and you'll see every generation adds a note to the song, but the melody remains. You sip again. The espresso is bright, tart, not your usual. But behind it, you taste echoes, cardamom history, soot and silk. A server passes by clearing cups. You hear her mutter, "No one ever finishes their coffee here." But they do, just slowly, with purpose. You pull out your notebook because yes, you now carry one and start sketching a line from that bathhouse, a quote from the listener, the tilt of a diplomat's cup, the smile of the Armenian roaster, the silence of the ferry at sunrise. And you realize this isn't just a beverage. It's a document co-authored by thousands carried forward sip by sip, moment by moment. You close your notebook. Outside, the day is moving fast. Traffic, phones, screens. But you're moving deliberately. Because once you've drunk from a culture that sees coffee as conversation, comfort, caution, and craft, you don't go back to sipping it like a fuel. You sip it like a mirror. You stand, nod at the barista, and step outside. One last cup remains. But first you let the breeze hit your face, let the sound of the trambolls and pigeons settle into your chest. You've traveled far without ever leaving the bean. You find yourself in a courtyard at dusk, somewhere in Istanbul, but also everywhere you've been. Every cafe, ferry, parlor, alley, and shaded corner folds into this one quiet space. The air is soft, lanterns flicker. The city hums, but far away like a lullaby remembering itself. There's a single chair waiting for you, carved from dark walnut, worn smooth by other dreamers. Before you, a small table, and on it, your final cup. Steam curls upward slowly like a story uncoiling. You sit, you breathe, you wait, and you understand now this is the ritual. Not the foam, not the filter, not the flavor, the pause. You take your time. The porcelain is cool at the edges, warm underneath. The coffee is familiar now, deep, grounding, generous. A sip not of adrenaline, but of return. The courtyard begins to fill not with people, but with echoes. There's the sound of cards being shuffled in a dusty salon, the clink of a saucer placed gently beside an ambassador's elbow, the rustle of silk robes, the hiss of an Armenian roaster, the gurgle of water on a ferry deck, the murmur of revolution muffled by cardamom. You hear them all the voices coffee carried, all the pauses it held, all the hands that poured without spilling. Here's your final mainstream reminder. The Ottomans didn't just drink coffee. They shaped civilization around it, creating spaces for thought, safety, diplomacy, seduction, refusal, and joy. Coffee wasn't served, it was shared. Your fringe gift. An old Ottoman proverb, a single cup of coffee is remembered for 40 years, maybe longer. Historians still argue whether this entire tradition, the slow pour, the tilted saucer, the deliberate foam, was born from necessity or artistry. But tonight, sitting here in a courtyard outside of time, it doesn't matter. Because you've learned the most important truth of all. Coffee doesn't keep you awake, it keeps you present. You finish your cup, set it down, and now, a pause. Not of speech, but of stillness. Wind down in 300 words. You lean back in your chair, let your shoulders drop. The last light of the day softens the corners of the courtyard like someone slowly dimming the world around you. Every shape blurs into shadow. Every sound seems wrapped in velvet. You listen to the breeze stirring the leaves, to distant footsteps that don't belong to anyone you know, to a single bell soft, far, patient. Your breath slows. The warmth of that final cup still lingers in your hands, in your chest, in the space behind your eyes where dreams start to collect like dew. You remember what the listener said. It's not what the coffee says, but what you say with it. Tonight you said pause, remember, breathe, and now the stories settle like grounds at the bottom of the cup. Not gone, just resting, ready to be stirred again another day. Let the silence stretch, let your body soften into the quiet. You've traveled through empires across centuries between sips and silences. Now there's nowhere to be. Nothing to say. Only stillness. Only sleep. Sweet dreams.